be seated. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Ray Mondragon. And he is here from Albuquerque, and he has taught for Chafer Seminary for about 20 years. And he is also a good personal friend, but he is not a pastor, and he's not a missionary. And
not a writer.
And he's not a writer. Nevertheless, he has written an outstanding book called, and see how thick it is, it'll take you a couple of days to read it. Science is God Shouting, the Biblical Foundation for Science. Fabulous book. And so that is available, I believe, at the True Grace book publication table back there. Is that correct, Dane? Dane's?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, you know. Okay, there you go.
You forgot to mention I'm not a conference speaker either, so we'll see what happens. Good evening or afternoon, unless you're on the West Coast, right? I thought of wearing maybe some wings since we're going to talk about angelology, but Robbie has such a strict dress code. I have to look like a penguin, even though most people that I know wouldn't recognize me. We got our slides up.
Yep.
Thank you. Somewhat in recognition of our forces that are out in the Middle East. Plus, I use this slide also for my intro slide for my series on the book of Revelation, the USS Gerald R. Ford. Spectacular and very sophisticated. In fact, one of the most sophisticated pieces of equipment that mankind has ever devised. Tremendous warship. It's got 2 nuclear reactors, the only aircraft carrier in the world that has 2. How many of you have even one in the city in which you live in? There are 4,500 plus or minus personnel, and that's a little bit less than most of the other bigger carriers. And the reason for that, it's so sophisticated, it doesn't require as many personnel. So very, very sophisticated. But even more sophisticated and more impressive, besides what man has accomplished, God has created angels that are even more spectacular. And I hope I can give you a little bit of a taste of that as we look at angelology. And I'm going to draw the angelology from the book of Revelation. And if you study the book of Revelation, you're going to find out that one of the major themes, in fact, one of the distinctives of the book of Revelation is its angelology. I think most of you are probably familiar. Should have given credit. I'm not a writer, so I use an editor, Nancy Northcott, so you can thank her. And Greg Rangel helped, or at least gave me some insight into some of the graphics that I'll use here. So Greg's the graphics guru. That's why I've got G cubed there. So angelology, you can almost develop a complete angelology just from the book of Revelation. And I want to give you just a little bit of a feel for that. So what we will do is we will look, after I introduce it, as I'm already starting to introduce, we'll spend our time with angelology generally. In other words, if you study angelology, what are some of the basic areas that you will look at? And then we will focus on the particular angels that we would consider holy, or those that did not fall, those that are devoted to what God had intended for them. And we may not have a lot of time, but I'd like to kind of give you kind of an overview of another set of angels, the fallen angels. We can call them the evil angels, because they also are very prominent in the book of Revelation. In fact, in the book of Revelation, we find some insight in this whole area of angelology that you don't have anywhere else in all of Scripture. So that makes it very, very unique. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the book of Revelation in terms of its Christology. Many people consider it something like a fifth gospel because it gives us a lot on Christology. And particularly, the four Gospels give us, obviously, the earthly ministry of Christ, whereas the book of Revelation focuses on the resurrected ministry of Christ and present ministry and future ministry. So Christology is a major theme, but so also another distinctive is actually angelology, as I've already mentioned. So these are two of the major distinctives, in other words, make the book of Revelation somewhat unique from all of the other books of the Bible. So that's a little bit of what I want to stress as well. We'd also say that when you study angelology, there are a lot of areas that the book of Revelation assumes that you already know. In fact, John, in writing the book of Revelation, assumes you know the Bible because he takes a lot of imagery from Daniel and some of the other prophets. And that is true with angelology as well. He assumes you have a little bit of background on angelology. For example, their creation, he doesn't mention that. In fact, the scriptures don't talk a lot about that. But there's some areas that are just assumed, but we have lots of other areas where we have lots of detail. So angelology, some of it is assumed. You may not know it, but angels occur in every chapter of the book of Revelation because that's one of the distinctives, every book. To give you an idea, holy angels occur in every chapter except chapter 13. Now that's holy angels. But if you know chapter 13, a focus of it is Satan and the unholy angels. So you would include every chapter, even though you have the evil angels in chapter 13. So Satan is in it. The word itself, if you do a word study and look up all of the usages of the word angelos, that's the Greek word for angels, that word occurs in every chapter except chapter 4 and 6. But I've already said that angels are even in those two chapters, although the word angelos doesn't occur there. You have these other interesting creatures. They're called living creatures in some of the versions, and they are in both those chapters. So every chapter of the book of Revelation has angels in it. So that gives you a feel for the prominence of them. So in chapters 4 and 6, you have these living creatures, and my graphic there kind of portrays the way they're pictured in those two chapters. So every chapter of the book of Revelation contains angels. And we have some of the central passages that give us insight in the area of spiritual warfare, which will be the topic of the rest of our conference here. So some of those, you have the blatant statement there was war in heaven. So there's spiritual warfare. And you have two sets of angels. You have Michael and his angels. Those are the holy angels. Waging war. So here's that central passage, waging war with the dragon. And if you study chapter 12, he is very clearly identified. It's a symbol, but he's clearly identified as Satan himself. In fact, we have the several names of Satan in this same chapter in verse 9. So angels are very prominent in all of these areas. And I'm not going to get into any, there's a lot of different views when you come to the book of Revelation, different views on virtually everything. In In fact, you have to be very careful what commentaries you read, if you read any of them, because there's so many different views out there. But it's beyond the scope of what I've like to do today to try to deal with any of those. There's just one little one I'm going to deal with, but other than that, I'm just basically going to give the view that I've come to the conclusion on. So if it's different from yours, then we can battle it out later. So that's a little bit of an introduction. So let's take a look and spend some time talking about angels in general. So this would include both the evil angels and the holy angels. And angels generally, taking a look at the terms here, in the Old Testament, the word for angels, malad, for you Hebrew students, that word occurs 213 times, according to the Logos software. And many of the occurrences has the idea of a messenger. In other words, it can be a human messenger, or it can be a messenger of any other sort that God can use. That's the Hebrew word. But if you study contexts, particularly in terms of angels, 110 of them pertain to the holy angels. Well, not just the holy angels, but sometimes others as well. So angels are in view in 110 out of the 213. In the New Testament, I already mentioned angelos is the Greek word there. You have it 177 times. Again, according to the Logos software. And when it comes to using it in the sense of a messenger, in fact, a human messenger, it only occurs 8 times out of the 177. Only 8 times, and always in the Gospels. Nowhere else. Now, I know there's a view that believes that the angels to the 7 churches, I'm going to talk a little bit about it, touch on it. But those would be an exception. So angels, when angelos occurs, 169, separating these 8. If you want to add the 7, for those of you that hold to that view, then 15. But I believe that there's only 8 that are translated and sometimes used in the sense of a human messenger. Other than that, 169 times that the word angel, in terms of the creatures that are angelic, I guess you could say. So in the book of Revelation, if you do the math here, you end up, is that math right? 67 times. Yeah, that's right. 67 times in the book of Revelation, and if you do the math, 24% of all of the Bible, that would include those references in the Old Testament, a quarter of the references in the entire Bible occur in the book of Revelation. Can you imagine that? That's why you can develop almost a complete angelology. And for the New Testament, it's 38%, over a third, not quite a half, but a third of all of the occurrences of the term angelos occur in the book of Revelation. So a very high percentage. So you would expect that you have a lot of detail given to us in the book of Revelation, and that's what I'd like to kind of focus on. And you have other verses as well, other descriptive words that describe angels, like the 4 living creatures in chapters 4 and 5 and 6 in the book of Revelation. So I hope I've kind of impressed you that the book of Revelation gives you lots of angelology. So those are the terms. In terms of their nature, some basic facts about angels, a lot of basic facts in the book of Revelation. Now, the theologies that deal with angelology will always address the issue of their existence. In other words, are they real? Do they actually exist? And most of them will spend most of their discussion, as far as evidence, dealing with the fact that they occur in Scripture. And they will emphasize the many in the Old Testament and the many in the New Testament. And that would be the case with the book of Revelation as well. So the words and related words refer to angels, so we believe that they exist because we believe in the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture. I mentioned their creation is assumed. It's not mentioned in the book of Revelation, along with other things that are assumed. They're spirit beings. This is emphasized outside of the book of Revelation, and there is one reference to unclean spirits. So that tells you that they're spirit beings. Doesn't mention anything in terms of the holy ones, but I think in general, these are fallen angels, so the holy angels would be spiritual beings as well. Basic facts. Do angels manifest themselves in ways that humans can detect them at least, if not even observe them? You're probably familiar with the example in the book of Genesis where Abraham entertained as you get through the passage of 18 and 19, you can come to the conclusion that he was entertaining angels. Now, there was a third one, and might be Christ himself, but angels seem to manifest themselves, and the evidence there is that they appeared like normal, everyday human beings. So the question is, do you have any examples in the book of Revelation? Well, if you come to chapter 9, you have a swarm of strange creatures. Very, very strange. The description is beyond our world. It was beyond John's world, so you almost sense he's struggling to try to describe them. And they obviously are on earth, and it appears that they are manifestations during the tribulation period of some sort of creatures, and that would mean not human, but probably more than likely evil, but angelic creatures. There's a second description. It's maybe not a manifestation per se, but it seems to be in the same chapter, demon-possessed army that obviously is visible and observable as well. So do they manifest themselves? It appears from the Old Testament and the book of Revelation that the answer is probably yes. And this might give us some hints as to what might take place before the rapture to prepare people for the disappearance of many believers. And I'm of the opinion that it's possible that this whole UFO phenomenon may be manifestations of angels that are obviously observable today. And that might be part of the explanation as to why so many people disappeared. But I don't want to get into detail. We're speculating here. But at least the book of Revelation seems to indicate that they have the ability to manifest themselves in even strange ways. And there's just that one example there. And obviously, there are both holy and evil, and we have lots of examples throughout the book. So we have both of them in the book of Revelation. So those are some of the basic facts. Some more about angels, kind of a major category. They have personality. This is clear from all of the other passages in Scripture. They show intellect in that they can communicate. They communicate lots. In fact, one of the major things I'm going to focus on is the communication of angels in the book of Revelation continually. And this is the holy angels, but we seem to have indicators that the evil angels communicate as well. And they follow instructions indicating intellect and apparently can receive communication as well. They have volition. The good angels continually, in almost all of the heavenly examples, are worshiping. That's a choice. That's volition. And we see that the following of instructions of both holy and evil angels indicate that they choose to either obey or obey at least the authority over them in terms of the evil angels. So they have volition. They have emotion. Now, I couldn't find any passages that indicate holy angels, or an example at least, but we believe that from many other passages that they have volition as well, or emotion rather. But you do have a clear passage in 12:12, woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you having great wrath. So the devil has great wrath, and this is reinforced in verse 17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and the woman is indicated to us in the earlier verses at the beginning of chapter 12 as probably the nation of Israel during the Great Tribulation period. But the point here, this clear statement on emotions of at least the devil, as known here. And by the way, the dragon, there's the symbol as well. The dragon was enraged. That's Satan himself. So they do have emotion. And if you look at the passages that describe them, they're described with personal descriptions. There's at least a couple of cases where they have garments that resemble what humans might wear. You have the personal pronouns that describe them, so they seem to add to the idea of personality. In 15:6, and the 7 angels who had the 7 plagues came out of the temple. Here's the passage, one of them. Clothed in linen, clean and bright, and girded around their chests with golden sashes. So they seem to be wearing apparel that indicate that they are not humans, but have personality and some resemblance to humans as well. Do they have ranks? Well, we know of archangels from other passages, and we know the different categories, seraphim, etc. And in the book of Revelation, you find the same thing. In fact, you have mention of an archangel. Michael is identified. In fact, I'll refer to him later. And interestingly, we have a reference in several places, well, a few places, that are described as Jesus' angel. And it appears that there's a special angel that has a very special relationship with him. I'll show you one of the verses later on. So here's an angel that is distinguished and different from all of the other angels in that Jesus claims him for himself, interestingly. And by the way, this is the only place that you have this concept is in the book of Revelation. You also have these living creatures, and I understand them to be angelic creatures. They resemble some in Ezekiel, in the vision that Ezekiel had early in the book. Not identical, but similar living creatures, and at least there's enough data that we can conclude that these are a very special set of angelic creatures, different from all of the others. So we have these different rankings, if you will, or different categories. Then you have demons as well, a separate category, and they are under the authority of a high creature, a very powerful creature, Satan himself. So you have indicators of the evil angels as well in terms of ranking. And in terms of power, we're going to see lots of examples, not only as I introduce the concept in terms of angels generally, but several examples of their power. You have strong angels identified this way. That didn't mean that any of them are weak, but it just calls attention to their power, strong angels. They are one of the instruments, in fact, one of the main instruments in all of the book of Revelation of God using them as instruments of his judgment. They're present in all three, at least present in all three of the major judgments, the seal judgments, trumpet judgments, and bowl judgments. They're all involved there, and some of them seem to be the ones that are actually executing the judgment. And if you look at the results of what is accomplished by their judgment, you see they have tremendous power. This is one of the reasons I mentioned that they are more spectacular than that aircraft carrier that I showed you if you look at the results of what they accomplish. So, instruments of God's judgment. And we already mentioned spiritual warfare. So, you have this battle, this heavenly battle that has been waged over the millennia. It'll come to a climax during the Great Tribulation, and spiritual warfare will be carried on. And in fact, if you think Satan has tremendous power, if you remember in chapter 20, there is an angel that binds him and puts him in the abyss for 1,000 years. So there's an angel that at least on that occasion, God granted him greater power than Satan himself. So tremendous power, and particularly in the area of spiritual warfare. And there's the binding of Satan. And they also show authority. They follow instructions, and God uses them, and he's the ultimate authority. So those are angels in general that include both the holy angels and the evil ones. Let's focus a little bit on the holy ones, because they have a particular ministry. They have primarily, in the book of Revelation, a ministry to God himself. And one of the things that surprised me is when you group these into categories, for example, their involvement in God revealing truth, revealing himself, revealing all kinds of things. You see that angels are there at every point. Let me give you the examples. It seems like the whole book, beginning in verse 1, and it seems to be somewhat repeated in the conclusion of the book. And verse 1 says, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the book's about Jesus Christ, and it's also from Jesus Christ, revelation of Jesus Christ, genitive there, which God gave him to show his bondservants. And then if you skip down into the verse, and he sent and communicated it by his angel. And there's the reference to his angel, that personal angel of the Lord Jesus Christ. But the entire book is communicated in some way via an angel. So they're involved in God's revelation. Communicated by his angel to his bondservant John. And to the 7 churches, each one individually, the 7 churches, starts off, to the angel of the church in Ephesus, write. And this will probably be the most controversial part of my talk here, so I'm going to be very careful what I say, because I think the viewpoint that I've taken goes against what most of you hold to. But anyway, I'll give you the support for it, and we can talk about it later. But notice, to the angel of the church in Ephesus, write. So they are involved in the recording, the writing of the message to each of the churches. Church at Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia. Did I remember them all? Laodicea. Did I get them right? And you have the same introduction to each one of them. The only thing is difference is you have Ephesus in 2:1, and then you have Smyrna in, verse 8, and etc. So they are involved in terms of the 7 churches. And one of the reasons I hold to the idea that these are angelic creatures rather than messengers, first of all, the idea of messengers, as I've already mentioned, is not very frequent at all. In fact, if you add them all up, here's another number. Sorry about that. I'm an engineer. I can't help it. 4.5% of all of the New Testament usages pertain to messengers in terms of human messengers, and they're all in the Gospels. And if they occur in the book of Revelation, angelos is in chapters 2 and 3, and if they occur there, then they would be the exception. And I don't see anything in the context to lead me otherwise, other than to take it in the same way that John is using it in the rest of the book. So I've come to the conclusion that angelos, everywhere in the book of Revelation, refers to these angelic creatures beyond humans. And we also have in chapter 1, verse 20, an interpretation that Jesus gives, and he interprets them using the same word. He could have used a different word. He could have used presbyteros, which would refer to an elder, or he might use another word there as well. But he uses the word angelos there. So to interpret it as messenger is putting on top of Jesus' interpretation an additional interpretation. So here you have two interpretations. So I prefer to just stick with what Jesus gave us there. And I know that most of our Bible teachers in this room believe they're messengers. Maybe they view themselves as angelic. Who knows? There's an angelic one over there. Okay, back to God using angels in terms of revealing himself. The worthy one, no one was able to identify. In other words, there's no one in the entire universe that is worthy to open the seventh sealed book or scroll. But it's an angel that, in fact, mentions that there is one, and he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, or the Lamb. In fact, the Lamb is the most common reference to Jesus, referring back to him as the sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb, the one that John the Baptist identified as the Lamb of God, the one that died on the cross for the sins. There's only one that is worthy to open, and it is him. But this is announced by the angel. Verse 2, and I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice. There's a strong angel, loud voice. It seems to me like heaven. If you read the book of Revelation, heaven is a noisy place. Proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to break its seals? And the only one worthy is the Lord Jesus Christ. And in chapter 6, where we have the opening of the seals, the breaking of the seals, and the revealing of what is contained in those seals, it's an angel, as you might expect, that gives the invitation to observe. For example, then I saw when the Lamb, there's the Lamb, broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures, there's your four living creatures, saying with a voice, I guess it's a little less loud voice, a voice of thunder, wow, come. And then we have the revealing of what happens as that seal is broken and the judgment that follows. And we see that in the first four, because we have four living creatures, and they introduce each of those four breaking of the seals. So they're involved, and in fact they speak, come. So they're involved in God revealing the judgments in chapter 6. They're also involved in the withholding of judgment and the announcement or the command in chapter 7, verse 2 and 3. And I saw another angel. So there's lots of them, as you can see, 67 references. Saw another angel, then skipping over, having the seal of the living God, and he cried out. There's another with a loud voice, again, very noisy. To the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, so now he speaks, do not harm the earth, or then it goes on until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. Chapter 7 is the sealing of the 144,000, probably evangelists, that God uses to reach a lost world during the Great Tribulation period. But notice who's the one that speaks to them, or speaks to the angels that are withholding the coming judgments. So chronologically, this probably takes place before chapter 6, before the judgments are poured or are opened in terms of the seals. And at that point, before the 144,000 are sealed, the judgments are held back. So at the very beginning of the tribulation period, I believe the 144,000 are sealed. So they're there. We have announcements of judgments in chapter 10. Now, some of them are concealed. And very interestingly, God is going to make sure that every single individual hears the gospel during that 7-year tribulation period. And in chapter 14, verse 6 and 7, we have the preaching of the gospel by whom? Not by a man, not by the 144,000. In fact, the 144,000 will preach the gospel. But there's going to be an angel, and I saw another angel, lots of angels, having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth. In other words, earth dwellers during this 7-year period of time. In fact, much of the book of Revelation deals from chapter at least 6, but you can even take it back to chapter 4, all the way to chapter 17, a particular period of time in the future. We call it the 7-year tribulation. You could call it Daniel's 70th week, and I believe it's one and the same. But during that time, another angel is going to have this eternal gospel, and it's going to be presented to every nation, tribe, and tongue, and people. And he said with a loud voice, fear God, give him glory. And then down it says, worship him. So this eternal gospel, God is going to use an angel to deliver it. So lots of communication. And we have other examples, the fall of Babylon, 14:8. In fact, there's a few other announcements and things that angels proclaim in terms of God revealing his plan, his will, things that are going to come about primarily during that 7-year period of time. And he uses angels. So very much involved in Revelation. And another angel, here's another one. Second one followed, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. I'll let you all interpret Babylon the Great, and we can talk some more about it later. The followers of the beast, in 12:9 through 12, there are announcements made to them. And when we have the harvests towards the end of the tribulation period, angels are the ones that command the one with the sickle. There's 2 judgments that are involved there, verse 15 at the beginning there. And then you have one in verse 18 as well. So angels are highly involved in God revealing. 15, another angel, lots of angels. Another angel came out of the temple, crying out with a loud voice, noisy again. To him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap. And then we have the recording of the judgment. But notice it's the angel that's crying out. And then verse 18, another angel. And he called with a loud voice again to him who had the sharp sickle. This is a second a different judgment, saying, "Put in your sharp sickle." And one's a wheat harvest, another one seems to be a grape harvest. And we even have angels dealing with the New Jerusalem, chapter 21, verse 9. And I take chapter 21 as the eternal state, chapter 20, the millennial kingdom or millennial period. In fact, it's only John that tells us it's millennial. And then chapter 21, I believe, is a new heaven and a new earth. And I believe that's a totally entire universe that God creates. We commonly call it heaven. Then here's the verse, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and spoke with me, so speaking to John, saying, "Come here, I'll show you the bride and the wife of the Lamb." So John is called to listen to revelation from one of the angels. So ministry to God that involves his revelation, and there are several passages. We don't have time to look at very many of them, but when you find a heavenly scene in most of them, if not all of them, you have angels worshiping. In fact, they seem to lead in worship. 4:8, and the four living creatures, each one of them having 6 wings and full of eyes around and within, and day and night continuously. They do not cease to say, and here's the content of what they say: "Holy, holy, holy." I think the angels are telling me to wind this thing up. One or the other. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come." But notice, angels are in the midst of the worship. And you can look at the other passages as well. They're involved in a similar way. They have a tremendous effect on the natural realm. And this is evident from other passages outside of the book of Revelation, but particularly in the book of Revelation, we have passages that we don't have anywhere else. And let me just give you some examples. If we had time, we could look up some passages, but in 7:1, angels have some authority to deal with climatology. I'll let you look up the verse. And geophysics in chapter 7, verse 2. In fact, we looked at that verse. Holding back those judgments were geophysical judgments. Chapter 8, we have another example of geophysics in verse 8 as well. Astrophysics, so those of you that have a little science background, they have the effect in different sciences. Chapter 8, chapter 10, chapter 16, examples of primarily judgment in those passages. Chemistry, 14:18. Hydraulics, 16:5. So they have an effect on the natural realm. Ornithology, they're involved with birds, 19:17. In fact, they call them to the great supper of God, and the birds respond. So they have some control over ornithology. So the effect on nature, they have, and then we have their involvement in divine judgments. We have the announcements of them. We looked at chapter 6. We have something also in chapter 10, announcing and also withholding. Chapter 14, chapter 18. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, we read this already, as with a voice of thunder, "Come." And you have 4 of them as you proceed through the chapter. Second living creature saying, "Come," and you have the same thing in the opening of the others as well. 14:8, and another angel, a second one, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Announcement of the fall of Babylon. Then another angel, a third one, following them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships a beast, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God." So involved at least in announcement and probably in some cases executing as well. We read the passage where they restrained the judgments. And after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds. There's climatology. 4 winds of the earth. And I saw another angel having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea. So there's geophysics as well. Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants. And then involved in the execution itself, chapters 9 or 8, 9, 15, 16. And I saw the 7 angels. This is one of the clearest passages, chapter 8, where angels are directly involved in executing the judgment. I saw 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. So the angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound them. And then you have the first sounding, and there came hail and fire. More climatology. And there came hail and fire, and 1/3 of the earth. There's geophysics. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. So they're involved directly in the executing of at least the trumpet judgments, if not also the seal and also the bowl judgments, by the way. Then I saw another angel, or another sign, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last. These are the bowl judgments that are coming, last plagues. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the 7 angels, "Go and pour out on the earth." So they're instructed to pour out these judgments on the earth. In chapter 16, if you read the rest of it, you have the results of those judgments. Pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God. So we have the wrath of God. And they're involved in spiritual warfare. I won't spend a lot of time on it because there'll be others that probably touch on that same passage. There was war in heaven, Michael and his angels. In fact, I read it at the beginning. Waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. That probably takes place during this 7-year tribulation, where some changes are made in the heavenlies, and the intensity of the judgments on earth as a result of this confinement to the earth of the dragon and his angels that waged war. And there's other passages that speak of angels observing or witnesses to what God is doing. In the book of Revelation, it mentions them. So those are the ministries to God, ministries to man, ministries primarily to believers. I mentioned the 7 churches, and if they're angelic creatures, then they're involved in ministry there, maybe as guardian angels. There's examples elsewhere of guardian angels. In some sense, they may be overseeing or guarding the 7 churches. They protect the 144,000 by sealing them, and I would also say they probably oversee their ministry and are guardians of them as well, because they will survive the Great Tribulation. They're involved in prayer. There's a couple of passages that indicate that. In terms of the prayers of believers, we have angels stationed at the gates of the New Jerusalem. Text doesn't tell us a reason, but I think it might be because we believers will be there. It might give us an opportunity to just go up to an angel and ask them, I had this experience. I almost believe that you were protecting me or whatever. But they're at the gates there, so I think they're going to have a future ministry to them. Ministry to unbelievers, announcements of coming judgment upon them. We looked at that. The executing of judgments. And also to the unbeliever, a final gospel message in that 14:6 passage that we looked at. So those are the holy angels, and I don't know how much time. Oh, 10 minutes. Wow. Evil angels. So demons, we could spend a lot of time talking about them. They're very active in that 7-year period of time. In fact, very overt and very maybe even visible if those locusts are manifestations. And the terms that are used, angels, demons, unclean spirits, characteristics, they are always under Satan himself and other relationships there. And their nature is they are evil, or described as unclean spirits. And probably a reference to their fall. It's not clear, but it talks about Satan sweeping a third of the angels. That's that 12:4 passage, so probably an allusion to their initial fall, but also to their confinement to earth. I think both are in that same passage. And everywhere in the book of Revelation, they're opposing God, as they always do. And elsewhere, they're opposing what God is attempting to accomplish. So demons, Satan is next. That same verse probably is an allusion to his initial fall, but I think in the context, it particularly refers to the confinement or kicking out of heaven and confinement to the earth. And again, that's one of those views that people take different views. That's pretty much what I think is happening there. We have several names of Satan himself. We could elaborate on them. The dragon, the serpent. This is the only passage in all of the Bible that ties Satan directly to the serpent of Genesis chapter 3, which indicates that the serpent was simply an instrument that Satan probably used. This is not in Genesis. Genesis is not real clear. But the book of Revelation, I think, clarifies that Satan is involved in the first temptation, involved in the fall of man, and he uses the instrumentality of the serpent, and we have an indicator here. In fact, it's stated 2 times in the book of Revelation. Then he's also called the devil. And primary ministry continues of deception. And again, Satan, along with the demons, oppose God. And we have the passages on spiritual warfare. We have the destruction only in the book of Revelation. Only in this passage do we have the destruction of Satan, 21:10. He's confined to the lake of fire. But he said to me, I'm getting to the end here, Robbie. But he said to me, do not do that. Satan, on 2 occasions, I think this illustrates on these 2 occasions that John was so impressed, he was so blown away by the spectacular nature of angels. I'm going to excuse John and describe it as probably a reflex response, and he bows down and worships the angels on 2 occasions, chapter 19 and this passage here. And I think that's just a reflex reaction to the spectacular nature of the angels. I'm sure John knew the first 2 commandments. Remember, John is at the end of his life, so the peak of his spiritual maturity. He didn't forget the 10 commandments. He didn't forget the Colossians passage that warns against angel worship. And even John himself, he concludes his 1 John, his letter, 1 John, with a warning concerning idols. And I don't think John forgot all of that. I think this is just more a reflex reaction, and it's recorded for us because we're susceptible to the same reflex reactions. So the angel says, I'm a fellow servant, bondservant, by the way. So he is a servant like humans or like John. Servant of yours and of your brethren, the prophets, and of those who heed the words of this book, worship God. So that's a good way to conclude this. As great as angels are, we are to worship only the one true God.
That's the time for a question and answer. Can I ask one?
For questions.
Okay, Ray, right over here. Right here. Yeah.
Oh, no.
No, really good. I have two questions. The demons that come out of the abyss after 5 months, or they torment people for 5 months. My first question is, do you connect that with the incarceration of some of the angels going back to Genesis 6? Okay, that's one.
Yeah.
And then the second part, this deals with the more controversial part of your presentation, according to your words. The angels of Revelation 2 and 3. I was taught differently on that, and let me just give you the argument that I was given that persuaded me, and you can tell me what you think of it. It deals with a condescension of hierarchy through the channel of communication as the vision arrived to John that's spelled out in Revelation 1, verse 1, verse 11, and chapter 2, verse 1. So when you look at those verses, there's a flow of communication from the Father to the Son to an angel,
Right.
to John, to a book, to another angel. And as you know, it's angelos there also, and that's used of John the Baptist in Matthew 11, verse 2.
Right. And
then to a listener or congregation of the seven churches. So as you move from number, let's see here, 5 to 6, and you go, well, there's an angel in number 3, if you followed my chronology there. And then you move from 5 to 6, and it goes back to an angel. It's like it does a U-turn, and the value goes back up again instead of condescending. Does that make any sense at all?
Kind of.
That's the way Dr. Toussaint taught it, and I don't know if you've heard that argument and how you'd respond to that.
Actually, I'm not sure I follow his argument, and I really don't have anything to respond to. Sorry about that.
It's the test question to get into heaven.
Yeah, if Andy asked it, yeah.
Okay. And the other question is, what about, do you connect the incarcerated angels in Revelation 9 with the fallen angels of Genesis 6?
I lean towards that, but I don't think there's, enough evidence to be conclusive on it. Yeah.
James 2:25 is a reference, Ray.
Oh,
James 2:25 is a reference, angeloi, with respect to human messengers, when Rahab hid the messengers that came to her. So that's outside of the Gospels.
right. Oh, okay. Yeah, good correction. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
And then I also, I noticed several of your slides had pictures of angels as attractive young women. Do you hold to female angels in any passages?
According to Jesus, that we are like the angels and don't have gender.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, those were AI generated, so.
Ray, on following up on that a bit, those are really good-looking angels you had.
Yeah. I liked them.
I know, they were good. And also in Zechariah chapter 5, there is a mention of females with wings. And I wonder if that could be female angels.
Could be. I think what Jesus is referring to is we don't have the capacity to reproduce.
Right, exactly. Or marriage, right.
So,
Yeah, maybe. I'm
one
kind of
one
hoping.
one of the conclusions I came to, which might apply,
Uh-huh.
is that it seems like we maintain, even during the millennial kingdom, and even in the eternal state, because there's nations in both, seems that we retain something of our identity, maybe our ethnicity, maybe even our gender. So,
Right, okay.
so
And then
possibility.
John was too embarrassed to ask this question, so I'll ask him for it.
Oh,
He
yeah.
wants to know if the fallen angels get to choose their own pronouns.
That's a good one to end on. Yep. I'm going to turn it over to Robbie. Robbie, you want to pick it up?